everything.
Hi, my name is Thomas and I'm a full-stack web developer. In the following video, I'm going to show you React Native. React Native allows you to easily create iOS and Android apps very easily, while sharing a similar code base. It's done entirely in JavaScript, although you can build custom components with native code like Swift or Java. But for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to be covering the JavaScript portion. Now, you don't necessarily need to know React to follow along with this video, but it will help. And I won't be covering any iOS stuff, simply because I don't own an iPhone or a Mac. Now let's get started with Android development for React Native. So in order to run React Native, you're going to need three things, and there's an optional fourth that I'm going to be showing you later. So let's open up our browser and head over to nodejs.org. We're going to be downloading the long-term release version of Node, and I already have this downloaded over here in my tutorial folder, and we're going to install that later. And next we're going to be installing Python. So head over to python.org, downloads, and click Python 2.7.13. Next up, we're going to be heading over to oracle.com/java. Here we're going to click Java for Developers. We're going to scroll down, click Java SE, come down here and select Java SE 8U121 or whatever you get here. Now we're going to scroll down here and download the JDK for your version of Windows. Next up, we're going to need Android Studio. So head over to developer.android.com/studio and just click the big Download Android Studio button. Now this last one is optional, but I highly recommend it simply because it's much faster than using the emulator that ships with Android Studio. And that's because on Windows, if you have a Hyper-V enabled PC, the emulator will be able to use Hyper-V, which is running on Windows APIs, and make the most of the resources available to it. So basically, the emulator will be running at nearly identical speeds to an actual device. So just click download the emulator here on visualstudio.com/vs/msft-android-emulator. So now that we have everything downloaded, let's start with installing Node.js. Just make sure to click through all the prompts. There's not really much you have to do here. Okay, now that that's finished installing, let's move over to Python. Now make sure you've downloaded Python 2.7, not the 3.0, or anything higher than 3, because that does not work with React Native. So again, just click through all the prompts, not much configuration to be done. And now that that's finished installing, let's move over and install the JDK. Again, we're just going to click through all the prompts, not much to do here. And now that that's finished installing, let's go ahead and install Android Studio. Again, just click through all the prompts. Now that Android Studio has finished installing, we're going to start Android Studio. We're going to go to Configure. We're going to go to the SDK Manager. And we're going to make sure we have installed Android 6.0 API level 23. So I already have this installed, but if you're doing a fresh install on your PC, you're not going to have this installed. So make sure to click that and apply. Now we can close out of Android Studio and open up our command line or PowerShell. I'm going to go with PowerShell. Okay, so from PowerShell, first let's make sure Node.js is installed. And there we go. It should return you the version. So now we're going to type npm install -g. Now this means global, so it's going to install it globally, so you'll be able to execute this from any command prompt. And we're going to type react native CLI. Now we're just going to wait for that to install. And there we go. And let's minimize this for now. So now I'm going to go over the optional install of the VS emulator setup and install. Okay, now that that's finished installing, let's open it up. And we're going to install a device with the Marshmallow API 23. I'm going to go with the one that's similar to the Samsung Galaxy S6 here. Now here you may be prompted that you don't have Hyper-V enabled, so you're going to have to enable that. And in order to do that, you may have to enable virtualization in your BIOS, but that goes out of the scope of this tutorial, so you're going to have to figure out how to do that on your own. I will provide a link here at the bottom of the screen that will show you how to enable Hyper-V. Now you may also be prompted to sign out of your PC to allow the permissions to take effect. So you're going to have to sign out and then log back in, and then do exactly as we just did. Okay, now that the device is installed, we're just going to click the play button here. And there we go. Our emulator is running. Now let's just make sure that it's running properly. Now if you try to do this on a virtual machine, as I did and had many headaches over, when you access any menu where you're able to scroll, the screen may go black, and you're just unable to fix it. You just can't really do emulation of an Android device on a virtual machine. Unless you're using the ARM API, which is ludicrously slow, and I highly don't recommend doing it because it is just insanely slow. But here, our device runs at near native levels, so it's actually very, very smooth. Hell, it might actually run better than my own phone. So now, we're going to open up PowerShell again, and we're going to check if our environment variables have been updated. So here you can see ADB does not work. And let's also check if the Android command works, and that also doesn't work. So in order to get these working, we're going to have to go into our environment variables. We can actually close out of this here because we're going to have to restart it anyways for the environment variables to take effect. So come here, click environment variables. We're going to come down here. We're going to create a new environment. So here we're going to call this Android_home. And the variable value is going to be our install directory for the Android SDK. Now, as long as you didn't change any of the settings while we were going through the install, the Android SDK is going to be located under your local disk C, users, your user, app data, local, Android, and right here we have the SDK folder. So let's get a visualization of that string. So here we are, C, users, your username, app data, local, Android, SDK. So we're going to click OK. And before we do anything here, we're going to open up PowerShell again, and we're going to run Android. And if it still doesn't work, you're going to have to add something here. We're going to scroll down to our path. We're going to click Edit. We're going to click New. And we're going to add 2 entries here. So we're going to add %Android_home %tools. And now we're going to click New again. And we're going to add %Android_home /platform-tools. Now we're going to click OK. I'm going just to OK out of all these prompts. We're going to run PowerShell again. And now, when we run Android, it's going to work. And it's going to show us the Android SDK Manager. Now, to get the Microsoft emulator working, we're also going to have to add a key to our registry. So, open up Run, and we're going to run regedit. And now that regedit's opened, we're going to go to HKey local machine. We're going to go to software. We're going to scroll down to wow6432 node. We're going to open up the folder and we're going to create, well, we already have one here for me. So for you, you're going to right click here, new key, and you're going to call it Android SDK tools, exact casing. So Android, capital, SDK, all caps, tools, capital T. And since I already have that, I'm just going to remove this key. You're going to come here and we need to add a new string value called path with a capital P. And we're going to create that, right click, modify, and the value data is going to point to our Android SDK. So C users, your username, app data, local, Android, SDK. Now we're going to click OK. And that's all we have to do. So we're just going to file exit and move on to the next step. Okay, now let's install the APIs needed to run React Native. So type Android SDK and here we are. So make sure to select these three here. You don't have to select these, but this prevents many potential errors. Now also scroll down here to Android 6.0. Now if you're not going to be using the Hyper-V enabled emulator, then select one of these here. I'm going to select Intel x86 Atom system image, and also make sure to select SDK platform. Then just click install, accept the license, and install away. Okay, when that finishes installing, we can close out of the Android SDK. So if you've opted to not use the Visual Studio emulator, I'm just going to quickly show you how to start the other emulator. In order to do that, you just write Android AVD, which means Android Virtual Device. That's going to open up a little Java application with all of these virtual devices for you to create. And you hit create. And this is where you create your device. So let's just give it a random name. In the device, you choose whatever device you want. Target, you're going to have to choose Android 6.0. And the CPU, Intel Atom x86. This is what you've downloaded in the SDK previously. And you give it a skin. Then you would click OK. And it's going to create the device. And once it's been created, you just click on the device and hit start. I have Hyper-V enabled, so this isn't actually going to start, or at least I don't think it should. So as you can see, it just closed out and nothing happened because I have Hyper-V turned on, so it just completely failed. But once you have this enabled, all you're going to do is with the emulator up, once it's started, you're just going to type React. You're just going to type React Native, run Android in the folder where the application is. So you would go to tutorial, wherever the folder is. So in this case, tutorial app, and you would just run it in there without running the command I'm going to show you, which is -- device ID. You don't need to do that. Now let's move on to initializing our application. In order to do so, I've navigated to my desktop and into the tutorial folder, and I'm going to run react-native init tutorial app. This is going to create the React application, installing all the dependencies, and setting up all the boilerplate code. Now that that's finished installing, we're going to open up our emulator, and we're going to start one of the emulators we have installed with the API level of 23, Marshmallow 6.0.0. Once the emulator is started, we're going to run adb devices. And this is going to print out our device's IP and port number. We're going to copy that, and we're going to run react-native run-android --device ID, and we're going to paste in our IP and port information. Now make sure that you've navigated to your project folder. In this case, it was tutorial app, which is created when you initialize the React Native project. So now we're going to execute this, and it's going to deploy the application to our device. Then you have to restart your Android device or emulator and re-execute the run Android command, pointing to the correct device. The React Package Manager is bundling our application, and here it is, our first React Native application. Now the cool thing about React Native is that we're actually going to be able to edit this here without recompiling our application. So we're just going to go into our folder here, and we're going to open up index.android.js. Okay, now that we've opened up the file, we're just going to change some of the text here. So let's start with right here. To get started, edit index.android.js. So let's just change this to hello and whatever your name is. Save that. Go over to your emulator, tap R twice, and your text is going to be visible here. Your changes have been made. Now before we get into building our example application, I'm just going to go over what a few of these things are. So as you can see here, we have our import tags. So we're importing all of the necessary dependencies and components that we need in order to create our React Native application. So here is our application here. This is literally all it is. This is all the code to actually create our application. We don't need anything else but this and the import tags, and right down here, the app little registry. So let's go into what this stuff is. So this is using ES6 classes. And here we have the export tag to export our class. And it's extending a component here, which is imported from React right here. And it has a render method. And our class has a render method, which returns our view. So if you're familiar with React, this is exactly how it's done in HTML, except we're swapping out the tags here. So if you're not familiar, what you need to do is when you do a return, so you need to, if you're going to return something that's more than a single line, you have to surround it with parentheses. And then you just return whatever elements are inside. So in this case, now keep in mind, you can only return a single item and everything else has to be nested inside of that item. So here we have a view component, which is imported here, which is essentially a div. And here you have your text, which is basically, it's your text element. It functions similar to like a p tag in HTML. And then here you see they each have their own style attribute. So style is essentially you're assigning the class. So if you were doing this in HTML, this would be class. And it's a little bit different because we're passing an object to it. And in this case, the object is here. This is the styles object, styles.container. Here's the container. This is the CSS. It functions just like CSS would in most cases. Except instead of having any dashes, because this is JavaScript, you have to use camel casing. And this is obviously a string. And in order to create a style sheet that's going to be performant. Now you can just use an object, but this allows performance benefits. So you want to do stylesheet.create here and then pass it an object. And then here we have the app registry, which is what's going to register our app. So we just pass in the name of our application, and then we pass in the starting component. So we could import another component here. Like we could create our own component import and have it start with that one instead of this, but there's not much point in doing that other than for organization purposes. And here I'm going to show you, now you may be wondering, how do I add multiple classes to a component? Now you may think you can just add a comma here and write whatever the class is, like styles.james or something, I don't know. You can't do that though, because ignore this. This just means that you're going to be using a JavaScript expression. So when you add these curly braces, everything inside here is treated as an expression. And if you add something like if you add data, of course, you know how JavaScript natively works. If you pass a parameter, it's just going to return the parameter. So in order to actually add multiple classes to a component, you have to put it in an array. So here we have an array, and we could do styles dot whatever, and then another styles dot, I don't know, pickle, and that would load all the styles into this text element. Obviously these don't exist, but if you want multiple styles on an element, this is how you would do that. That's the rough basics of what's going on here in this index file. And now we're going to move on to actually creating our application. So to get a better understanding, let's actually just delete all of this and rewrite it ourselves in order to get into the flow of writing a React Native application. So first we're going to need to import React as well as component from React up here. And then we're going to need to import. So now we're going to need to import, let's just import the necessities first. So we can start with app registry. And next, let's just import a text element. I'm going to import that from React Native. Now let's get on to actually creating a class. So export default. This is going to export this as the default. So if we import this somewhere else, it's going to export this class as the main thing. So class, and this is going to be a contacts book application. So let's just call this a contacts app. And then we need to extend from component. So this is going to take all the functionality from component. It's, if you're familiar with programming 101, basically, object-oriented programming principles, this is inheritance. Now let's create our render method. So render, and let's return a view. So return. And in this case, we don't actually need parentheses because it's just going to be a single line. So text, I guess we can start with hello world to make sure that everything is working. So now let's register our component. So app registry dot register component. And this is a method, so we're going to do that. The name of our application, contacts app, and then we're going to pass it the component. So in this case, we're just going to use a lambda function here and pass contacts app. Now that our emulator has started, we're just going to open up PowerShell. And let's quickly navigate to our folder where the application is being hosted. So now that we've navigated to the folder that's hosting our application, let's just run adb devices, copy our port and IP information. And now we run react-native, run-android --device ID, paste in our device ID right here, so the IP and the port. Just click enter. Now we just wait for the application to be built and sent to our device. So you might get this error here. So we're just going to press any key to continue as it says. And you can see that this didn't work per se because it didn't build our application. As we ran this previously, it just reopened what we already had. So let's just press that. And if we run this again, it should work. Okay, so we don't have the error here now, so this is hosting and serving our files. So if we press R twice, it should load our new index file. In this case, it's transforming, so it's actually bundling and building it now. So it appears that we have an error. So let's see. App registry, register component. Okay, so made a little iffy error here. Now you have to keep this right here. This has to be the same name as the folder, as the application, so we are just going to call this tutorial app. We can keep this to be hosting any component that we want. And this needs to be a capital R. So just save, double tap R, and there we go. Hello world in the smallest lettering possible. So now let's just quickly add an inline style object so we can get this a bit bigger because this is really tiny. So in order to add an inline style object, you're going to do the curly braces. Now remember, this is not an object in itself. This just indicates to React that we are putting an expression into our code. So we're going to add our object here. So right here you see the curly braces. Now this is our object. And we're going to call font size in camel casing. And for font size, we can actually just use raw numerical values. So let's put this at 48. Save. Refresh. And there we go. We've got everything working and running, and we have our very, very bare bones application. So from here, we're going to be able to build our contacts app. So let's move on to actually doing so. Let's start off with just putting this in parentheses so we can expand. And let's add the title of our application at the top. So in this case, we're just going to add a text element. And let's call our application Contactaroo. Why not? Why not? Close that tag. Make sure it's working. Contactaroo. There we go. And now let's actually create a style sheet. So we're going to come up here and add to our React Native imports style sheet. Let's call const. And let's create a variable. So const styles equals style sheet dot create. Add our object in here. And let's call our first style title. So in here, we're just going to have another object. And we're going to add font size. Let's go with 48. That seemed like a pretty reasonably large enough size. And let's add our style to our text element. So style equals styles dot title, save. And let's make sure this is working. And there we go. Let's just align our title towards the center. So text align, center, save. And let's make sure that worked. And there we go, it's centered. Now I'm going to show you why we can't actually add multiple elements like this to a simple return statement. It works just like vanilla JavaScript. You can't return multiple objects. You can't have a return statement that returns multiple things. And each one of these components here, each one of these tags, is its own object. So we can't actually return double text, or because if we do that, we're going to get an error. So we're actually going to need to put this in a view element. So let's just import view, create our view tag, let's refresh, and there you have it. Nothing has changed. Now we're going to add our contact list. So in order to do so, we're going to import a list view. We're going to save. We're going to put our list view right here. So list view. And a list view is actually a self-closing element. So we're just going to close it off like so. Save. Let's make sure there's no errors. And there is. So basically what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to actually add a constructor here in our class. Create a constructor. And the constructor is what initializes all the variables in our class. If you're familiar with Java or C#, these should be quite familiar to you. And up here, we're actually going to need to create a data source. So we're going to call this const data source. So DS, we're just going to abbreviate. And new list view dot data source. And in here, we're going to pass in an object. So this is our options. This is how you're going to configure our data source. All we need to add here is a row has changed. And in here, it's going to be a function. So we're going to use a lambda and R1, which is row 1 and row 2. And this is going to detect if a row has changed by checking if the previous row is different from our current row. So all you need to do is row 1 does not equal row 2. Now this is direct from the React Native documentation and should be suitable for most applications and most datasets. And if you want to go into more detail, definitely check out the React Native documentation. It's wonderful stuff, very well written, and will go into a lot deeper detail than what I'm going to go into here. Now we're going to go into a new subject, which is state. So each object holds its own state, and state can be thought of as data that's going to change in your component. So if it's going to be changing over time, we're going to use state, and it's going to hold all of the pretty much variables in our application that we're going to be needing to use throughout the component, and passing two child components. So in order to create a state in our constructor, we're going to do this dot state equals, and we're going to give it an object. So inside of our state object, we're going to pass data source, and our data source is going to be ds dot clone with rows. So this is going to use our data source and add rows to it. Everything that happens in React Native is immutable, or at least should be immutable, which means that if you create an array, you can't push pop into said array, because that's against how React works. It's not going to be able to detect the changes properly. So everything's immutable. So in this case, clone with rows is actually going to use our data source and create a new data source from the old data source. So inside our clone with rows, we're not going to do curly braces. We're actually just going to pass it an array. And in our array is all of the entries that we're going to have display in our list view. So in this case, let's just add some sample entries like James and Susie. Now let's get back onto working with our list view. So in our list view, we're going to add a data source. In this case, data source equals, and let's add our React expression here. So this dot state, so this is referring to here, dot data source. So now we're going to add a render row attribute, and then make sure it's an expression. And here we're going to use a lambda, and the lambda is going to receive the person's name as the parameter. So we're going to just call this person name, and it's going to return text element. And here, more curly braces to indicate an expression. So this is going to be our raw JavaScript interpretation. In this case, person name. Now we're going to close off that tag. And now if we refresh our application, it's still not going to work. Why? Because we haven't added super to our constructor. And if you're familiar with Java, super is exactly what it is. So what super basically is it's going to initialize our component with all the parameters sent to it. So in this case, if we had props being sent to our thing, we would have to do super props if we wanted to use our props here in the constructor. Then it will initialize and allow us to work with the props. So now, if we just double tap our application is going to render our list view down here in very tiny letters. So let's create another style element. In this case, let's just call it contact. Add an object, font size. Let's go with something like 24. Save. Let's add the style to our text element here. So style equals curly braces styles dot contact. Save. Let's reload. There we go. Now, rather than return a text element for each row, let's actually create our own component. So let's go over to our folders here and add a new folder called app. And in app, we're going to add a new folder called Android. And in here, we're going to create a new file. And this is going to be our list item component. So list item.js. And in here, we're going to import React as well as component from React. We're also going to import three things here. So view, text, and a new item called Touchable Highlight from React Native. And now we're going to create a class. So export default class list item extends component. There we have it. And we're going to give it a render function. And we're going to return our new item here. So let's put it inside a view. And inside our view, we're going to add our touchable highlight. Let's close that off. And inside of our touchable highlight, we're going to put in our text element. In here, we're going to add curly braces, and this dot props. Now we haven't covered props. So props is what's passed to a component from another component. It's immutable, so you should never edit props directly. You should set up functions and handlers in order to edit the state that is being manipulated, in which that state is passed as a prop to its child component. And this dot props dot, and this hasn't been created yet. We haven't passed the prop yet, but in this case, we're just going to call it name. So this is going to pass down the name from the previous class right here. As you can see, the person name, and this is going to come in here. So let's just write that real quick in order to get a better understanding of how the props work. So in this case, we're going to have to import right here at the top, import list item from, and in this case, we have to actually navigate to our folder. So dot slash, which is going to be relative to where this item here is, this index.android. So dot slash app slash android slash list item. And we don't have to add .js here because JavaScript knows that if you're not adding that, it's probably going to be a JavaScript item. It just assumes that it will be a JavaScript item. Then we hit save. And in here, we're going to actually add our component. So in order to add a component, it's going to look just like all these components, view and text and list view. So it's its own tag, but we're going to make it self-closing. So list item, and here's where we add our props. So props are just attributes added to a component. So name equals curly braces person name. We're going to close off our tag, and there you have it. So let's just finish this component real quick. In order to do that, all we have to actually do is close off our text tag here and hit save. Now we just come over to our app over here, double tap R. And there you go. We have our touchable highlight, although it doesn't look any different than it did before. But now, as you can see, we are passing props from our index component here to our own custom component. And that's the basics of how a React application is going to work. You're going to be creating your components, and they're going to be nested inside other components. And then the state's going to be passed down from the major first component. So there's actually a concept of smart and dumb components, where one is smart, so it contains all the state and functions and handlers that you're going to need in order to actually manipulate the data. And then you're going to have dumb components like these that simply just return a view. So let's quickly just copy our style sheet from over here into here, and remove contact from here, paste it in. Let's remove title from this one, and just import style sheet, save, add our style over here to our text element, and refresh, and there we have it. Back to what it looked like. So the reason we included a touchable highlight is because on the touchable highlight, we can add an onPress method here. Of course, you can add this to your views and to your text, but with a touchable highlight, let's just quickly add in a blank lambda expression, save, and refresh. When you click, as you can see, it creates this highlight when you're clicking or pressing the element. Now we can change that color, but for now, we're just going to leave it as is and implement some actual functionality. So we're going to head back over to our index.android.js, and we're going to create a new method here, and we're going to call it viewContact. So in viewContact, what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a new entry to our state here. And here we're going to call it modal, however it's pronounced, visible. And we're going to start it off with false. And in view contact, what it's going to do is it's going to flip the switch for modal visible. So this dot set state, and here we're setting our state. So in here, when you set state, this is how you change state in React. This is going to essentially, if you're familiar with object.assign, it's essentially doing that with the state. It's going, you don't have to give it all the values, you just have to give it which value you want to change, and it will just change that one or whatever ones you want it to change. So it basically merges two objects together, the new object and the old object, which in this case is the new state and the old state. So we would write modal visible, and in this case we're just going to use a ternary operator to quickly swap it. So we'll do this dot state dot modal visible, which is going to get the current state of model visible. And if it's true, we're going to return false, and if it's false, we're going to return true. A simple, easy peasy switch. Now we're actually going to have to make a new component. Well, we don't have to make a new component, but for organization reasons and making sure our files aren't massive, we're going to create a new component under Android, and we're going to call it contact details.js. And in here, we can just copy our imports from over here, paste them here, and we can just remove the touchable highlight. We're going to create a new class, so export default class contact details extends component. We're going to render, and in our render function, we actually don't have the component that we're going to render yet, so we're going to import it up here. So modal, so modal, this is our new component, and we're going to place this modal right here, and let's close off that tag. So in modal, we're actually going to add this real quick to our index over here. We're going to add it right at the top here. Now model is going to pop up over our elements, so it's not going to actually like push anything down or alter the layout or anything. It's just going to appear as an overlay. So we're going to, first, we actually need to import it, so I'm going to copy paste this and replace the items. So contact details, and then in here contact details lowercase c, and we're going to add that right here. So contact details, save, and we're going to pass it two props. So the first prop is going to be visible equals this dot state dot modal visible, and also we're going to pass it the view contact. So toggle view equals this dot view contact. And now we're actually sending this function here to our contact details. So let's just quickly make sure that everything's working. So in our modal, we're going to add a couple attributes here. First one being visible equals this dot props dot visible, save, and the next one being transparent. So we're going to actually just disable this for now. We're going to make it not transparent, and that's intended behavior for the future as well. And inside here, we're just going to shove in a view, and inside the view, let's just add a text element, and in text element, let's just add click me. And on the text element, let's add an on press equals, in this case, this dot props dot toggle view. And now we just come over here to our contact thing, double tap R, and as you can see, we have an error, and that's because I didn't put this in a return tag, so silly me. Quickly add that and fix the indentation. Okay, now when we double tap, here we are. And here we have a little warning here. So failed prop type, the prop on request close is marked as required in modal, but its view is undefined. So on request close, we're going to have to add that. So on request close equals, let's just use a lambda here. And for this lambda, let's add, say, let's go with an alert, contact close. Now let's double tap. There we have it. Our modal is working, but we have no way of triggering it. So in order to actually trigger it, we're going to pass the toggle view here, this .view.contact, over to our row. Now, this is so when we tap this, it's going to open up our modal. So over here in our list item.js, under touchable highlight, under on press, we're going to have it toggle the view. So this .props toggle view. Going to add parentheses there to execute it. Double tap R, click, and here we have an error. So telling me undefined is not an object. So the problem is that we have to bind this. We have to bind this to the function. So binding this means it's binding this current component, this as in the JavaScript this. If you don't know what that is, you should probably Google it. It's very useful. And we're going to have to bind that as well over here on the row. Save. And now when we double tap, it works. So we have click me, and you can see click me. And if we hit back, contact closed, the alert works as well. But as you can see, it doesn't toggle the view. So on request close, we're actually going to have to toggle. So we're just going to do this .props.toggle view. To double tap again. It's open. So if we hit back now, it's going to make it go away. If we open it again or click me, it's going to make it go away. So now in order to get the contact information onto our modal, so onto here, we're going to need to change our data source, like change how it functions, what's being stored inside of it. We're going to keep the names, but we're going to turn them into objects. So we're going to start off with turning this Mr. James Hornlurker to an object. So here's one object, the name, here we are. And let's just include an address here. Address 123 Candy Street. We're going to save. Now we're going to turn Susie into her own little object here. So name, paste Susie, address, let's go with 4113 Willowbrook. Why not? You know, addresses don't need to be realistic. They just need to be. Let's just bring this down here for sake of reading it. Now down here we're going to have to change our render row. So instead of person name, now it's just person. And then here in name, we're going to change this to person. We're going to pass it the person. And now we're going to head over into our list item. And we're going to pass it this .props.person.name. And now we're also going to change the toggle view here. So instead of this .viewContact.bind this, we're actually also going to bind the person here. So this comma person. So this is going to add person as a parameter, the first parameter actually, to our viewContact. And up here in viewContact, we're going to set the person. So it's going to take a person parameter, and we're going to go into our state and add a new entry, person. And in the beginning, it's just going to be nothing. So name, I'm going to make that empty, and address will also be empty. Save. And in here, we're going to change the active person to person here. Save. So what this is going to do is when you click on this, it's going to pass the person to viewContact person. And then the person is going to be saved into the state. And then in the state, we're going to pass that to the modal in order to view the person's details. But we're also going to need to add a safe hand because we need to make it so if person doesn't exist, if person is not here, we're just going to return nothing, the blank person state here. So in order to do that, we're going to use the ternary operator. We're going to do person. And if person does not exist, this is going to return false. So person. And if person's true, return person. Else, we're going to return this right here, our name and address, the blank one. And now we need to head over to our contact details, because right now we're not currently printing anything. It's just going to say click me. We have to replace this. We can keep the text element here. Got to remove the on press. Here we're just going to write name and add in our little expression here. So this dot props dot person dot name. Copy this and change this to address. And here address. And now we'll just double tap R, and we're receiving this dot props dot person dot name is not an object, and that's because we haven't passed person to contact details yet. So in contact details, person equals this dot state dot person. And now if we just double tap R again and we click one of our entries, we're going to get the name and the address, of course in very tiny characters. So let's fix that real quick. We're going to add a style object. In this case, I'm just going to quickly copy the styles from the list item, and we'll just rename this to field, and we'll keep the font size at 24, and we'll add the style tag to both. But what we can actually do here is we can change this view element into a text element, add the style of styles.field, save, double tap R, and now when we click this, as you can see, the text element accepts inner text elements, which act more like spans. They don't act as block level elements anymore. So as you can see that they're running together like so. In order to break that, we can actually add an expression here, /n. We got to turn that into a string. Double tap, and there you go. If you're familiar with JavaScript, you're going to know about /n for strings. So as you can see, the style element is applied to all children of the parent text element. So any text components inside this text component are going to inherit said styles. So now we're going to implement the ability to edit our contacts. So let's get started. First things to do, we're going to move this array here from our clone with rows into its own variable up here. So var, and let's call this contacts equals, paste the array. And in our state, we're now going to add the contacts to our state. So contacts. And in here with data source, the ds.clone with rows, we're going to put our contacts in there. And now that that's set up, let's just refresh to make sure it's working. And it's not. So we have to add a comma right here. Okay. There we go. Just tiny syntax errors. Now let's add our edit contact function or method, if that's what you want to call it. We're going to pass in an index. Now we scroll down here, and because we're going to be passing index to edit contact, we're going to have to get the index of the contact when we edit it. So in this case, render row, we're going to have to render row actually passes three things. So it passes 1, the data, 2, a section ID, which we don't need, and then 3, a row ID. So we're going to bind the row ID back here at the end at toggle view. So this.viewContact.bind. I'm going to pass it the row ID. And now when people go to view the contact, we're going to add our view contact method index. And in this case, we add the index here, pass it the index. And now if it's missing an index, we're going to change this. So index, we're going to use a ternary operator. So if the index parameter exists, it will change the index to index, or else it will change it to -1. Now we can move on to our edit contact method. So under edit contact, we're going to do var new array equals this dot state dot contacts dot slice, because we need a new version of contacts. We don't want to reference the array. Then we're going to do new array index equals. In this case, we would typically, what we want is a new person, so the edited person here. But in this case, we're actually going to just, for the sake of showing that this works, we're going to create our own person. So I'm actually just going to copy this up here, paste it, and let's just add some names. And now we have to, of course, set the state. So this dot set state, we're going to change contacts to the new array. and we're going to go into our data source. We're going to write this dot state dot data source dot clone with rows new array. We're going to save. So now under contact details, we're going to have to add an edit attribute. It's going to point to our edit contact method. So this dot edit contact. We're going to go to contact details, and under text here, we're going to give it an onPress attribute, which is going to execute this dot props dot edit. Now when we refresh, undefined is not an object, so we're getting an error. Ah, yes, we need to bind this to our edit function. And we also need to fix our onPress over here, so we're just going to take this, and we have to put it in a lambda. And add parentheses. Now in our index.android.js, we're going to fix right here the new array index. We're just going to refer to this .state.index instead, since we removed it from here, so we don't have to pass an additional attribute to our contact details. Now when we save and we refresh, click on a person, we head back, we're going to see Bobby. So in order for that change to carry over to the modal when we make the change, we're just going to have to add person here to our state. And in this case, we're going to refer to new person, which is going to be the new person that's added when we edit the person. So it's basically replacing, but it's going to use the previous information. But in this case, we're just going to copy this because we haven't set up the new person yet. So we just save, refresh, click, and when we click it, you can see that the name and the address changed to Bobby. Now we're going to add the new person part of our edit contact method. So if we head over to contact details, we're actually going to give this component a state. So we're going to go and create a constructor. In this case, we would need to initialize the props. So super props. And now we're going to set up our state. So this dot state equals, we're going to set the name. So this state's going to represent our person. So the initial value for name is going to be this dot props dot name, and the initial value for address, you guessed it, is going to be this dot props dot address. It's not it. It's this dot props dot person dot address. This dot props dot person dot name. Now we're also going to add edit to our state. So edit, and right now edit's going to be false. So now we're going to have to create another switch. So in this case, toggle edit. This dot set state, that's in the object, edit, this dot state dot edit, and if it returns true, then we return false, and if it returns false, then we return true. Save. So now we're going to add user input to our component here. So in order to do so, we're going to add a text input component. So we're going to give this component two modes, an edit mode and a regular mode. And in order to do so, it's actually fairly simple. We're just going to separate this name here, this name label, from our text, from our person name here. We're going to move this over here as well. Save that. And if you run this right now, we're going to get an error. We should. Guess not. Crazy. Oh, that's because this stuff right here is actually in a text tag. So we're not going to get an error. And we're actually going to change this outer text tag into a view. And we're going to add the style attribute to our labels. And instead of calling this field, we're actually going to make our own new label style. And the label style is going to also have a font size of 24, but we're also going to give it color of black. And you're actually allowed to use HTML colors here, so we can do that. And then under our label here, we're going to change this to the label. And over here with our props.name, we're going to delete the new line tag because now this is a view, so we don't need it because these are going to be block level text elements. And we're actually going to have to put each one of these fields into their own views. So view, close that off, copy that, paste each one in here. So now your return method should look like this with the outer view component looking like so. We're going to add our own expression here now. So this .props.person.name, what we're going to do is add a ternary operator. So we're going to check this .state.edit. And if edit is true, we're going to return a text input. And for now, we'll just return a raw text input. And if it's not true, we're going to return this .props.person.name, but in a text tag. Let's close that off. We're also going to need to put our curly braces around this again. And now, as long as we fix this indentation here, we need to move the curly braces onto their own lines like so, underneath the text element. And when we double tap R, we're going to get it working. So we have our name and our address. And now in order to toggle the edit mode, we're going to create a button down here. So inside of our containing view, we're going to create, and in this case, we're going to import button from React Native. We're going to add the button with an on press equals, and then this dot toggle edit. And we're going to close the button. And a button requires a title attribute. And in this case, it's going to vary based on what the state of edit is. So this .state.edit, and if edit is true, it's going to display save. And if edit is false, it's going to display edit. We're going to save. I'm going to double tap R here. And here we are. Here's our button. When we tap edit, we're going to get an error. And that's because in our onPress handler here, we haven't bound this to it. So when we refresh it, we're going to get our text inputs. So you have to bind this, pretty much most onPress things, even if it's in the same component. Now, I'm not sure why that is so, but that's just how React seems to work. Now, if we hit save, it goes back to this. So now in order to display the names here in the text inputs and bind their input to our state, all we have to do is go into our text input and set the value equal to this.state.name for the first one. Paste that in here at the bottom one too. Change this to address. And we also have to change the onChangeText attribute here. So we're going to put in an expression, and this returns the new text. Now we're going to set our state, so this dot set state, and we're going to change, in this case, name to the new text. Save. We're going to copy this, paste it down here as well. And in this case, we're going to change this to address. I'm going to save that. Now, when we double tap R, come over here, edit. We don't get the names. So, and the reason we don't get the name is because up here in our state, we actually referred to this as this.props, but in this case, we only have to refer to it as props.person.name. So now when we double tap R, hit edit, it's still not going to work. And for the reasoning for this not working is because this is a single element that is not being recreated every time we click on a new person. This is being reused and replaced. So this constructor is only being executed once. And in order to fix this and have it so each time the name is changed instead of this, like whatever we write here remaining, we're going to have to add a new thing. We're going to have to add a lifecycle method. So a lifecycle method is essentially how React deals with receiving new state and new props and how it sends it to components and how everything works, how it is able to tell the difference between a component that's changed and a component that hasn't. It's also very useful for manipulation of the UI and how everything is working. So in this case, we're going to add a new method called component will receive props. And in here, this is the new props. So we're going to get our new props. And every time new props are assigned, we're going to call this dot set state. So now new props dot person dot name and address, new props dot person dot address. We're also going to set edit back to false and save. And now, if we double tap R, open this up and hit edit, we have our names in the inputs. We can change them and do whatever we want with them. And if we hit back while we're in the edit menu, click something else, as you can see, we're now out of the save menu, so we're not in the edit mode. But if we click on this, click edit, head back, and click on the same one, again, we're not going to be in the edit mode. So this actually works in our favor because if a user wants to cancel any changes he's made, he can just hit back. And in order to save our changes, we're going to head over to our toggle edit method here. We're going to check this dot state dot edit. And if it's true, we're not going to do anything. But if it's false, we're actually going to call our edit function. So this right here, the edit contact. And under edit contact, we don't actually need even the person here. We just need the new person. And here we can actually now implement new person. Get rid of this and also add new person. Head back over here to our contacts. And under toggle edit, for the false value of this state.edit, we're just going to call this .props.edit. We're going to pass it our new person. And in this case, our new person is going to be an object with a name of this .state.name and an address of this .state.address. Now in production, I wouldn't recommend writing your code this way. This isn't how you should do it. You should definitely have prop types, which I'm not going to explain in this video just because the video is already quite long. But you should not write code like this in production, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to keep it like so. So now when we double tap R and we go over here and edit, so we've run into a problem. Because I implemented edit this way, we're not going to actually be able to do it the way I initially hoped to be able to do it. So we're going to have to create our own save method here. So save person, and in save person, we're going to just copy this and paste it here. And we're going to come down to our button, and our button is going to execute different logic based on the edit mode. So this .state.edit, and if it's true, then when we press this button, we're going to execute this .save person .bind this, and if it's false, we're just going to execute toggle edit. And in save person here, we're also going to call toggle edit at the end here. So this .toggle edit, we're going to save that. We can actually get rid of this conditional here now. We can just have it call this .props.edit. Save, and now when we reload, open this up, edit. Let's call this guy now, let's change his first name to Brian. Let's save that. Now his name is Brian Hornlurker, and if we head back to our address book, Brian Hornlurker. So now we've implemented the edit functionality. Now we're going to implement the remove functionality. So if we want to remove a contact, this is going to be fairly straightforward. So all we're going to have to do is in our index.android.js, we're going to come over to our list view. And for our list item, and over here, we're actually going to go to our list item. And with Touchable Highlight, we're going to add a new property. So on long press, so this is like if you were to hold it, curly braces, add our lambda, and this is going to trigger this .props.remove. We're going to save that after adding parentheses. We're going to head back into our index.android.ios. going to create this new remove method. So remove contact index. And to remove the contact, we're just going to go and basically copy this code here. So we can actually just straight up copy this. And we can remove the person here. So we're just going to have our contacts new array, data source, this.state.datasource.clone with rows. Now let's get to creating the new array. So the new array, so var new array equals this.state.contacts.slice, because we don't want to reference the array. And now we just make an array that doesn't include the index of our selection. So in this case, new array dot splice index 1. We're just going to save that. We're also going to, obviously we need to assign that to new array. So new array equals new array dot splice. In this case, we can actually just shorten this. So slice dot splice, because if we were to do splice, it can actually now onto creating the new array. So in this case, var new array equals this dot state dot contacts dot slice. Now we're going to splice by index and 1. Now we're going to save that. Now splice, I believe, is a mutator. That's why I'm not going to use that. And that's why I'm using slice before it, because slice is immutable. It returns a new array. Save. And we need to pass that now to our list item. So over here at the end, remove equals this dot remove contact. Save that. We also have to bind this. Now in our contact, and now in our list item again, we're actually going to need to come over here to, we also need to add the row ID. So after bind this, we just add row ID and save. Now refresh and we just hold down something, it'll automatically remove it. Now there is one problem. If we remove everything from the data set, we're actually not able to, because if we remove everything, there's going to be an error. So we're actually going to have to do this. So in our list view, we're going to have to make it variable based on a little special something. We're going to have to make it response. We're going to have to make it only render the list view when our list has more than 0 items in it. So in this case, it's fairly simple. This.state.contacts is greater than 1. Of course, contacts.length greater than 0, or greater than equal to 1. And if it is greater than that, we just paste in our list view here. So in this case, I'm going to do this, that. It's a little more clean. And then if it's not, we're just going to render a text element that says, you have no contacts. Put in text here and save. Now when we double tap, remove everyone. It seems we're not able to remove this last guy, and I'm wondering why. So the way I solved that tiny little problem here, see now you can see it displays you have no contacts. I don't know why it wasn't removing the final index, but probably some stupid problem that just decided to fly by my brain, and I'm just being really dumb right now. Please let me know. Tweet at me, at Spaceman Thomas, because I honestly have no idea why it wasn't working. But the way I fixed it was new array, and then I use a ternary. So new array.length is greater than 1. And if it is, then I splice it with index minus 1, 1. Else I return an empty array. And that's how I made it work. So now if you hold them down, both of them get removed, and there you go. So the last thing we're going to do is adding a contact, and that is going to be very easy. In fact, we're not even going to create a new component or anything for that. We're just going to create a new method called add contact. And what add contact is going to do is it's going to take, and what add contact is going to do is we're actually going to reuse the contact details. So what we're going to do is this dot set state, and we're going to set the index to this dot state dot contacts dot length, and we're going to set contacts to this dot state dot contacts dot concat, and here we're going to add in our new person. So in this case, name, and then it's just going to be blank. An address, which is also going to be blank. We're actually going to need to copy this and remove it from here, put it in a variable. So we're just going to follow the new array paradigm we've been setting up for ourselves. Save that. Set it up to new array. Set our data source to this dot state dot ds dot clone with rows. New array. Nothing new here. And that's basically it. All we have to do is come here. Under our title contactaroo, add a button. Of course, we need to import the button, but for now, we're just going to do that. Come up here now, import the button. So import button from React Native. Come back down to the button, set the title to add contact, and set the on press to this dot add contact dot bind this. Save. Now when we double tap, hit add contact. We also have to toggle the view contact here. So this dot view contact, and view contact takes a person and an index. So instead of actually setting the index here in our state, we're just going to do this, pass this, and our person here is just going to be this blank one here. I'm going to save that, and of course delete that, save. Now when we double tap, add contact, it's going to set us up here, and we'll click edit, say George, address, some random numbers, goofy ball, save, head back to our menu, and there's George. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I do recommend, no, you must check out the React Native documentation. This should have hopefully given you a head start. This is definitely a monstrosity of an application, but it does showcase all the details you need to create your own applications. So this has been Thomas. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you're interested in coding bootcamp, check out devmountain.com, where housing is included in your price of tuition. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and support me on Patreon. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.